Hello, Shamira Media audience. Welcome back to our program. We are talking with artist Maria Nissan, and we have invited her partner, Xavier Huber, who is of Swiss descent, to talk about their non-profit organization, and it is called MicroPlastics Joe. It's an interesting name, and we're going to ask them to tell us why they named it that, and we're going to talk about what their nonprofit does. Hello.
Hello.
Xavier, welcome to our
Thank you.
program at Shamiran Media. Let me first ask you about the name of your company, MicroPlastics Joe. It's actually a nonprofit. What does Joe stand for? Is that a man's name?
No, actually, that's a funny story. So we met with Maria both on a cleanup hike in Jordan. And we were thinking about merging and basically building an organization based on our backgrounds and skills and competencies around single-use plastic pollution. And the most obvious, visible, but also invisible effects of single-use plastic are microplastics. So they are very teeny pieces of plastic that most of them are invisible by the human eye, called microplastics. And in Jordan, they had a way to identify a local organization by adding GO at the end of any name of organization, nonprofit, commercial organizations. So we came up with MicroPlastics Joe with Moria quite rapidly, I think, after like few days or maybe a few hours, too quickly. And we decided that this will be part of the story. We met in Jordan. We started our nonprofit in Jordan. We registered the nonprofit in the US last year. So we decided to create this kind of story around that name that will also be able for people to be reminded. And we had a lot of questions after we chose that name about what are microplastics. And I said I can tell you what are microplastic, but it's already in your body right now. And we all have microplastics in our organs, in our blood, and through the water we drink, through the food we eat, from the air we breathe. And we don't know yet what are the effects, but we know that every single human on this planet already has microplastic in their body. So this is a kind of common denominator that we have, whether where we live, our type of culture, the lifestyle, what we eat. And this is how actually we decided to choose that name and keep that name.
Let me ask you something. So this, you believe that we do have microplastics in our system.
Scientifically.
Is that a foreign body that has somehow, because of our environment, has penetrated into our bodies, or we are born and it's in our DNA?
So it's not natural. So we tell people, plastic doesn't grow on trees. So it's a man-made product. It's mostly come from the oil and the gas industry. So it's a chemical process. And plastic never disappears. So it's not because I litter my plastic bag in nature that it will disappear at some point. It just breaks down in smaller and smaller pieces through a process called photodegradation. But the pieces are getting smaller and smaller, but they never disappear. They're just getting smaller. And we find microplastic, scientists find microplastic in any single-use plastic bottle that we're going to drink, in the food we eat, in the meat we eat, in fish. So there is a lot of beauty products. Yes. So basically, it became such an invisible ingredient of a lot of our recipes, if not all of them. And there is more and more studies, but it's a very recent founding that scientists did these 15, 20 years. So there is not enough background to actually be able to see this will be the long-term impact. We know on animals and on smaller insects, they have this kind of create disturbances in their brain. These create disturbances in terms of hormones. So we also found microplastic in placenta. So we know that the mother can transmit breast milk. So it's everywhere. And we've started really digging and researching about microplastics as soon as we met, because there was this belief and misconception that plastic disappears. Nothing disappears. Like we said, nothing disappears. Everything transforms into something else. And we usually use this allegory saying that if you have an apple and you throw your apple in nature, the insects, microorganisms, microbes, mushrooms, whatever, they're going to do the job to disintegrate your apple. But plastics, no, it breaks down. And we have been to a lot of different places and countries where wildlife were eating plastic in front of our eyes. Elephants, monkeys, camels, goats, cows. Maria was mentioning we were in Indonesia and we were on this kind of like huge dumpfill. And we saw cows and I was like, oh, that's funny, there's cows. And they came and they were eating directly from the plastic. But they don't distinguish between what is food, what is plastic, like most animals.
It appears that you have done a lot of research, both of you, and it's a subject that you have, it's very near and dear to your heart, the existence of plastic in our environment. I just would like to ask you, either one of you or both of you, what would you replace plastic with if you had a choice of not producing plastic at all?
All right, so I think like we should distinguish between multi-use plastic and single-use plastic. So if you have a standard car, in terms of volume, plastic represents 50% of your car in terms of volume. So we're not going to be able to replace all the plastic in the world tomorrow. But what we look after and what we focus on is single-use plastics. And we have been to a lot of different places where there is not much alternative to single-use plastic because reusable bag, reusable bottle are not accessible, too expensive for a lot of people. So our kind of like motto is to reduce and reuse as much as possible because the alternative are there in certain countries or certain places, but they are not everywhere.
Would you like to add something?
Yes, so actually scientists have been tampering with trying to find an organic version of plastic that biodegrades. So it's not actually plastic, it's made from organic materials, and once it goes in nature, it can biodegrade. Now, that's not to say it's the perfect solution, but there was a time before plastic exists that we lived in more of a circular economy, and I think that is the solution. Because right now, it is very heavily on the individual to come up with solutions when it should be coming from the corporations. So for instance, Coca-Cola, the #1 plastic polluter in the world, they used to be sold in glass bottles, and then you would bring the glass bottle back, and they would refill those bottles, wash it, sanitize it, and sell their products again. And that creates this type of circular economy where they're not creating waste. And I think it's really important that we think about that because there are solutions out there that are viable. And we don't have to have plastic inside our blood, and we don't have to live in this world. So I guess as an individual, some of the solutions for our own consumption is the obvious ones where you have a container instead of a plastic bottle or a fabric bag. But there are other things such as shampoo and conditioner. We now have bars that they come in. You don't have to buy that with plastic packaging. We also have beauty products that are advertised, no plastics, organic, natural. There are saran wrap instead of the plastic wrap that we use. They come in beeswax fabric wraps that actually work better and last longer. So there are these little initiatives that are happening, and the more research you do, you can find solutions for that. But as Xavier said, when we were traveling in some of these countries, they don't have the means to these products. So we really believe that it's going to rely heavily on scientists to come up with solutions and corporations to actually fund it.
I presume you have made great many changes in your personal lives as far as use of plastic. Yeah. And you've probably replaced plastic with other alternatives in order to comply with your philosophy. Mm-hmm. Now, let's go back to you meeting in Jordan. Xavier, what do you do for a living? And what is your education, your background?
So I have a background in the humanitarian sector. So
in what? I'm sorry?
Humanitarian sector.
Humanitarian sector.
So I was working in project management, I was working in communication, and I have a bachelor in international business development. So I actually studied in Lebanon before. And when I was in Lebanon 2015, 2016, at that time, there were a lot of protests called You Stink protest. So long story short story, a lot of trash was accumulating in the streets, and there was a lot of riots and protests from the population saying that we need to find a solution to waste management which is efficient and sustainable over time. Then I continued my education. I was working for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, where I was born and raised, and I was deciding to go to the Middle East because I wanted to work in the humanitarian sector there. And this is where we met with Moria on a cleanup hike. So I still had this kind of like sustainable mindset that I kept, and I packed my luggage everywhere I will go. But I was thinking about it like something secondary. My main focus was humanitarian action. And as Maria highlighted before, when you travel to Jordan, you will go to the most beautiful places like Petra, for instance, or the Amman. And it's nice, it's beautiful, but you will find trash everywhere. And you realize that the population that are most affected by the negative externalities or the negative impact of trash and single-use plastic pollution are the poorest communities. And this is where I started shifting my mindset, saying like, okay, environmental issues is affecting everyone, but certain communities at a larger scale, it's way more intense. And then we met together with Moria, and I started researching again and again. And then we said like, okay, let's start developing workshops, because Moria is a very talented artist. And these workshops were really interesting because when we will be introducing ourselves, Moria will be saying, I'm an Assyrian artist. So they didn't know about who are the Assyrian people. And then we'll talk about plastic pollution. They will be like, no, there is no plastic pollution. It's like, it disappears. It's like, and we just realized that we will be able to build awareness about, in one hand, single-use plastic pollution, and in other hand, like Assyrian people, Assyrian history and legacy. And I did also my own research, and I just realized how Assyrians were smart and creative to develop with nature. You don't build an empire without natural resources. And there is, in the Gilgamesh epic, there is a saying that say, either you conquer nature, or you make it an ally. And I was processing that for a long time and say like, okay, now we have so much knowledge that are also quite different, but that are so complementary. So we can create an organization and build something where the communities can benefit from. And the idea is not to go to a place or a country and say like, oh, we're gonna tell you like, go recycle your plastic bottle, or use this, use that, because it doesn't exist. So the idea was to support local efforts, to meet with the people that are motivated and interested in making a change. And we started like a year and a half ago, and we have been giving workshops to almost now like 1,000 people, like 1,000, especially youth and kids. And the idea is to disseminate information, not just like to impact the people attending the workshop, but for these people to talk about it with their friends, with their families at school, and to create like this kind of a snowball effect about like, hey, I have a piece of plastic, I should put it in a plastic trash, or sorry, in garbage, or like whatever
Recycling
place,
bin.
recycling. Mm-hmm. Is there is a thing like also in these places we've been, a lot of people talk about recycling. We need to recycle. And we'll be like, yeah, I mean, ideally, but where do you recycle? And people don't know, because there is no recycling factories, there is no recycling facilities.
It's sent to China.
A lot of the trash and the plastic that used to be sent to Thailand, to China, Southeast Asia. So this kind of like became like dumpster of the world. And this Asian population, they were fed up saying like, we cannot like welcome all the trash in the world. But people have this kind of misconception that recycling will solve everyone's problem. And in average, even in the US, 90% of the plastic that we consume is never recycled, because there is so many economic factors at stake. It's very expensive to sort, transport, treat, reconciliate. Yeah, it's a long process. It's not cost efficient and time efficient for a lot of companies. So Mario was mentioning some of these companies. It's easier to actually use virgin plastic directly coming from the oil industry to create new plastic bottle or packaging. So this is how we started, basically, and this was the thought process behind the organization and behind like our philosophy. And I think that we had, maybe you can talk about it more, but we had this project next year to go to the village where Maria's mother was born and raised.
And where was that?
To,
Radin.
Iraden.
to create like projects there with communities. If you want to talk about it.
I mean, it's still preliminary to discuss, but our whole idea is that we go to these villages in northern Iraq area, team up with some local organizations that are here at the convention, and create an Assyrian flag in some of their schools out of waste materials. Because Jordan's issues with plastic waste is very similar to Iraq's issues with plastic waste. They're not going to have recycling facilities. They're poorer communities. They're not going to be able to afford these alternatives. So being able to offer these types of workshops and programs and education to our people is something that is our big goal of ours over the next year objective.
So how do you find places where you go through your nonprofit and do your educational work, your lectures or your teachings? How do you find those places?
Lots of research. Xavier is very good at Excel spreadsheets. So we think of, when we were thinking of Thailand and Indonesia, we were, using the hashtags on social media, plastic waste. What else did we look for?
Like
Green Earth.
plastic training,
Yeah.
plastic waste.
Seeing what popped up in that region, and then contacting people through social media, while also I would be Google searching different places in Thailand, like where the beaches were, because usually where the beaches are is where we're getting a lot of trash, especially in Southeast Asia, because they have that area where they're just like they're getting trash on the shores from other countries, so it's not even theirs. And then we would reach out to organizations that were already working with these things and telling them who we are, sending them our website, and asking if they have any connections. And 90% of the time, people who are working with this project and working with this issue are wanting to find other people who can help too, because it's a huge problem. So they would give us connections.
Have you talked, do you have any plans to speak to corporations about whatever solution that you think should be found on the plastic issue?
So I think there is like two approaches here. There is a top-down and bottom-up. So we started with a bottom-up approach, meaning that we're basically going to the communities and delivering these workshops. And the thing that we have in mind is also a top-down. So if it's not at the state level, it should be at the corporate level. And I give you a funny anecdote from this afternoon. So we are staying in this hotel today, and we have been using reusable glass cups for coffees. And when I came back to the room, I just realized that they took this glass away and they replaced them by single-use plastics cups. They look like paper cups, but in all the paper cups in the world, there is always a thin layer of plastic that keeps them waterproof. So there is plastic inside. And that's funny because this is something that a hotel can implement easily. It's not cost efficient, it's not time efficient, because you need someone to collect these glass coffee cups and to wash them, bring them back. So this has a cost for a corporation. But we are thinking really about finding with corporations the way that they can also promote that and make it a competitive advantage in their specific sector. And if you go to certain hotels, you can have a station to refill your water, and there is a small screen that says how many single-use plastic bottles were saved by people refilling their water. And it's kind of like the small steps that planting the seeds in corporations, saying you want to be sustainable. It's not just about producing a nice report at the end of the semester or the quarter, but it's also actually taking actions. And if you take this action, you communicate online, and it's kind of like a win-win. It's good for your reputation, it's good for the society, and it's good for the earth as well. So there is corporations, that I think will not be ready to change tomorrow because they make profit out of the plastic. When you buy water, you buy plastic because the water has intrinsically almost no cost, but you buy the plastic bottle in which is the water. And this is something that it's like, these are the type of corporations that are very difficult to target. But we started at the school level. And if you have a school and you have 600, 800 students, you can make a difference. And we started really promoting these daily habits of saving plastic or refusing plastics. There is also the idea of plastic bans or adding a tax on plastics. There is the pros, there is the cons, is that if we can afford the alternative, it's fine. If I come from a poorer community, it's going to be a burden to have actually to pay a tax on single-use plastics. So there is a lot of discussions and basically like talks that we follow around that question, because it's a very interesting question, saying that it cannot only come from the people, it has to come from the state and from the corporations.
Maria, another way of combating the use of single-use plastic, you have taken some of those single-use plastics that somebody threw away, perhaps, and you use it in your artwork. Now, I told you earlier, before our interview started, that sometimes when I take a magic marker and write on the plastic bag, it just like vanishes. It's kind of the writing slides off the plastic bag and it just becomes a non-readable thing. How do you manage to have such intricate, full of detail paintings, a lot of them with Assyrian theme, on these little delicate one-time use plastic bag? It blows my mind because I looked at it from the close and I thought, this is an impossible art. How did she do it? Please tell us how.
So first of all, because Xavier and I are collecting these plastic bags from rivers and seas and on our hikes, they're all kinds of different plastic. It's not one standard one. So that is kind of the same answer for the materials. There's not one standard answer one standard material I use per plastic. It's trial and error, and it's been trial and error for 4 years because I started the paintings about 4 years ago. I can understand that most permanent markers I can use on a plastic bag. Whether or not it will be very visible or it will come off immediately when my finger touches it is trial and error, and I have to do that with all of my paintings. So each time I make a mark, I usually have to let it sit overnight and then come back to it the next day.
Like one mark? One mark?
Not one mark. So let me rephrase that. Each time I want to do a drawing on a plastic bag, in order for me to understand what materials are going to work on that plastic bag, I have to do a test. So I get my materials, I get my markers, my paint markers, my acrylics, watercolors, and I test samples on that plastic. If the next day I come back and it's still there and I'm able to touch it and it doesn't go away, it's a go.
Oh, wow.
So this is how I try to understand what I'm able to use. So it's mixed media, trial and error. As far as those small detailed marks, those are something that I can generally use gel pans for. I'm able to write the marks on them, and then I let it sit overnight after I do those details. I'm very careful not to touch it because it's wet and it will go away. And then when I come back the next day, if it's still there, great, the day's not lost.
So your thin canvas is never an assured thing that can be painted on. You're going to have to wait to see if that canvas, that thin plastic canvas, is usable or not. That's you're living in a world of uncertainty from your travels to your paintings.
I think like also one thing which is funny to mention is that in Jordan and in other places, when we'll bring back these plastic home, we'll have to wash them. So we found a way to actually, the most efficient and sustainable way to wash our plastic bags in the bathtub. And we'll hang the plastic bag outside. And I remember because Maria was always telling me, like, if I had to go somewhere, just if you find a green bag, I need a green bag for my painting. Please bring back a green bag. And we realized that in different, based on the countries, we don't find the same color everywhere. Like Jordan, there was a diversity and variety of different colors that was amazing. So for Maya, it was Disney. It was Disneyland. It's like, wow, it's super color, pink, purple. And in Asia, Southeast Asia, mostly white and transparent. So we collected a lot. And also Maria was using other type of single-use plastic for larger scale installations. So a lot of bottles.
You two are so incredibly dedicated to your cause. It blows my mind. Now, let's get a little more personal. The two of you have decided enough of travels, and that you're going to settle in Georgia.
Yes.
And have a life there together. How did that come about?
I'm tired.
Even though you
Very
look
tired.
like a young woman.
Thank you. I think that the more time I spent abroad, it was a fun vacation. But by the time I had met Xavier, I knew I only had a couple years of traveling left in me before I wanted to settle down and get a house. And we had plans to get married and to settle down. And we wanted to do that in a place that we weren't living in our luggage. We would cook meals and buy spices. And, in 6 months, all our kitchenware is in our old house and we have to buy new stuff. And it's just all those small things that you don't think about when you have a home that...
I think, I agree with Maria, but there was also the idea that when you are like everywhere, at the same time you are nowhere. And we were thinking about like having a base. So continuing operating in those regions and countries, but from the US. And also like having some kind of roots here to develop the organization and have the time, because it's true that what Maria was saying is that every time we go somewhere, we have to start from scratch. That starts by looking for a place to live, looking if there is transport, what kind of accommodation, if there is Wi-Fi, if we can have an internet connection good enough to work.
And making connections.
Making connection.
We have to make all new connections.
Yeah. So the idea was for Maria to go back to the US and for me to settle also here with Maria in the US was to really create this base and then having the time to focus on what we do best or what we are passionate for, and to develop connections here also in the US, because the problems that we saw in different countries will be different here, I guess. Here we don't see much trash littered when we go on the streets.
Yeah.
But the plastic, again, doesn't disappear.
Unless
so it goes
you're
somewhere.
on streets of Los Angeles.
Yes. Yes, we saw
Yeah,
videos.
you gotta come fix this one.
Yeah. But coming from Switzerland, I feel like kind of like also closer in terms of culture, in terms of like society and dynamics. So, and it's true, it's tiring after like a few years. You have to deal with a lot of daily issues that most people don't have to deal here with in the US. So to take the time to focus, to resource, to like get re-energized and say, okay, what are the next projects? If there is one in Iraq, we'll be super happy to go there. If there is one in Asia and Africa, a few weeks, maybe a month, we'll think about it. We'll pull up a spreadsheet, and but that's the goal behind staying here long term.
Well, Xavier, I have to really thank you.
Thank you
for keeping our Syrian environmental artist here and not in Switzerland.
But that's
Thank you for that. We need her here. We love her. We want to see her more often at the conventions. Thank you for you making the switch and coming here.
But I knew from the beginning, knowing Maria and her family, that Assyrian have such a strong community. It's impressive. Like, we have been here, we attended several panels and discussions, and people are not only friendly, because there is a lot of friendly people in the world, but this kind of connection they have, and every time you meet with someone, it's easy to connect. And I think that Assyrians are relatively small communities compared to other in the world, but very solid one. And learning about history, learning about the cultural heritage, learning about Assyrian art, as you mentioned before, it's kind of like I travel back in time, and we think about Mesopotamia, we think about like Sumerians, Gilgamesh, all these things that we may have learned at school, but then when you start learning a bit more about Assyrians, you just realize that you actually carry this legacy and heritage with you. And I feel like honored and privileged to be so close to the community, and people have been incredibly nice also, and our
Thank you
family
very
is super
much.
inclusive as well. So
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the kind words. Yes, we Assyrians are a special people. We've survived so many thousands of years. There must be something within
blood.
us,
Yeah,
a special ingredient, not made of plastic,
No.
but of steel,
Hopefully.
to
That's true.
to let us survive. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for this opportunity.
And I hope that you do get married and have little children.
Soon.
I hope that's in the plan, and we're
is.
looking forward to that and seeing you in the next conventions with more work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this
I was
opportunity.
impressed by your work.
Thank you.